Hi, this is John Oaks. We're continuing our series on Daniel. Now we're getting to the great stuff, my favorite stuff, which is the visions of the future. In the last lesson, we saw that in Daniel 2, Daniel's given a vision which shows in broad outline the history of the Mediterranean basin in the Near East for the next 2,000 years. But then in Daniel 7, we got a lot more detail. We saw prophesied 650 years before the events, the reign of the 11th emperor of Rome, Domitian, the first one to systematically attack and persecute the church, described in great detail. And what does it tell us? Well, the Bible's inspired by God, and number 2, God rules the nations. Now we're going to look at the next vision, which is Daniel chapter 8. Daniel chapter 7 concerned the persecution of the Christians under Rome. Daniel chapter 8 is going to concern the persecution of the Jews under Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, I told you at the very beginning of the series of lessons that the immediate audience of Daniel is the Jews suffering extreme persecutions under Antiochus Epiphanes in the period from 167 to 164 BC. Now, up till now, I've not really done anything to back up that claim, but when we see Daniel chapter 8 and then in Daniel chapter 10 and 11, we're going to see that this is the case. So now, in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel has another vision. Again, the year is around 552, 551 BC. Daniel's been in captivity for well over 50 years. And this time he has a vision of a ram and a goat, starting in chapter 8, verse 1. In the third year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision about the one that had already appeared to me. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. In vision, I stood beside the Ulai Canal. Now, Elam was a city in Persia. And when you're looking, if you're sitting in Susa, if you're looking across the Ulai Canal, you're looking to the west. You're looking towards western Turkey, and you're looking towards Greece. So, by the way, I don't know if Daniel was ever even in the city, but in his vision he was. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal. The horns were long. One of the horns was longer, the other one than the other, but it grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged towards the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. This is the Persian Mede Empire. The 2 horns are Persia and Media. It says one grew up later, was larger. That's Persia. Originally, it was the Mede-Persian Empire, but after Cyrus is the Mede-Persian Empire. And it says it charged first to the west, then to the north, and then to the south. That's exactly what Cyrus did. First, he took Lydia, which would be in Turkey, to the west. Then he took Babylon, which would be to the north, from the point of view of Persia. And then he took Egypt, which was to the south, exactly like it says here. But this vision is not principally about Persia. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossed the whole earth without touching the ground. It came towards the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal, charged at it in a great rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram, shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground, and it trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up towards the 4 winds of heaven. I'm telling you, this is Alexander the Great. The year is 335 BC. Persian Empire has been in place for about 200 years. And this obscure young general, about 21 years old, crosses the Dardanelles Strait with an army of 30,000. Persia had a standing army of over 200,000. 3 years later, Persia was completely destroyed. And Darius IV was dead. It was like he was floating above the ground. Exactly like this. There's an interesting story that Josephus tells us. It comes from Josephus, which is when Daniel came to Jerusalem, he asked them to surrender. Sorry about that. He asked them to surrender, and they brought him a copy of Daniel. They said, look here. This vision is you. And Alexander always treated the Jews well. In fact, through most of the time, the Greek kings treated the Jews quite well, and they let them have their own religion. So anyway, as you know, Alexander conquered this huge empire, but when he died, his wife Roxanne was pregnant, but he had no successors. He was quite young. He was only 34 at the time. The year is 323 BC, 11 years after he began his conquests. So what happened was his generals fought it out, and over the next 4 years, the next 4 to 5 years, guess how many kingdoms emerged? The answer is 4. Antigonus, Lysimachus, Ptolemy. We know their names. We know where they ruled. Ptolemy ruled Egypt. Lysimachus ruled in Greece. Antigonus ruled in the east, in the area of Afghanistan and Pakistan and Persia. We know them. All right, and so exactly as Daniel saw in the year 552 BC, these are events that happened 230 years later. But that's not the main focus. The main focus is this next horn, this next king. Verse 9. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the host of the heavens. It threw down some of the starry hosts to the earth, and it trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. It took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and its sanctuary was brought down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. Wow. This is exactly what happened. The precision of this, and also Daniel 10 and 11, is why even the hardened skeptics admit, all right, we agree. This is, in fact, what happened. So here's the detail. Ptolemy, who later will be the kings of the south in Daniel 11, he had a general, and his name was Seleucus. Seleucus went and fought against Antigonus, who was the most powerful of the 4, and he took Syria. Now, apparently what he said to himself is, why should I give Syria to Ptolemy? So he formed a 5th dynasty. Now, that dynasty ruled, and like it says here, it grew to the south and to the east. So from Syria, he went to the south and he took Mesopotamia. And then he went to the east and he took Persia. And then it says he took the beautiful land. Now that did not happen for over 100 years. It wasn't until around 220 BC that his great-grandson, Antiochus I, took Palestine, the beautiful land, from the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies had held it for over 100 years. But in this prophecy, Seleucus, or in this case the son of Seleucus, took the beautiful land. First to the south, then to the east, and then the beautiful land. Exactly like it says here. All right? But then he did some terrible things. Seleucus, who was the son of Antiochus the Great, Antiochus Epiphanes, the son of Antiochus the Great, did some terrible things. Now what happened was, originally, like his prior Greek rulers, he treated the Jews fairly well, but he went and fought against Rome in Egypt, and he lost very, very badly. He blamed the Jews for not supporting him, so he came back and he started a terrible persecution against the Jews. He demanded that they become Hellenized, which means Greek-like. He as I think I said earlier, he killed pigs in the temple, in the holy place, in the most holy place. He smeared their blood all over there. You can read about this in either 1st or 2nd Maccabees, which are in the Apocrypha. If you have a Bible that has an Apocrypha, you can just look it up online. And he made Jewish forms of worship illegal. He outlawed sacrifice. He said, if you circumcise your son, first we'll kill your son, then we'll kill you. There's a story in 2nd Maccabees chapter 7 of 7 sons who Antiochus tried to force to eat pork, and they refused to do it. He fried them all in a pan. And then he killed the father. And last of all, he killed the mother. Horrible cruelties. Just, as we'll see prophesied in Daniel chapter 11, a number of Jews said, it's okay, we'll go for a little Greek, a little Jewish. And they accepted lack of circumcision. They accepted the lack of sacrifice. But there were some that hid in the mountains and were persecuted horribly, as we'll see, and not mentioned so much here, but mentioned in Daniel chapter 11, the righteous ones who eventually became the Maccabees. Now, why did this happen? According to this, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention one important thing. It says, he set himself up to be as great as the Prince of Hosts. What this arrogant man did, Antiochus Epiphanes, was he made a statue of Zeus. He put it directly above the Holy of Holies, above the mercy seat in the temple. And the face on the statue was Antiochus Epiphanes, which basically says God came down. The Jews called him Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus the madman. All right, but why did this happen? Why was it that God had lost control? It's like God can't protect his people? Exactly the opposite. Because of rebellion. Verse 12, because of rebellion. Because of whose rebellion? Because of God's people's rebellion. If we're prideful, if we're arrogant, if we rebel against God's commands and decrees, he will bring us into judgment. He will discipline us. This came from God. And I'm telling you, the Jews during the time of the Maccabees could read Daniel 8, and they could realize this is because they'd been rebellious. And some accepted responsibility for that. All right, anyway, the time that it removed the daily sacrifice, it was given over to it, and this terrible man prospered in everything he did. But this story has an awesome ending. It's great. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another one, holy one said to him, how long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary, and the trampling underfoot of the Lord's people. He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, and then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. By the way, that's exactly what happened. The date when the temple was reconsecrated is December 25th, 164 BC. It's still celebrated today by the Jews as Hanukkah, the festival of the candles, Hanukkah. Now, we don't know the exact date when the temple was desecrated. It was sometime in November 167 BC. So the time was roughly 3 years, 1.5 months. He says here for 2,300 evenings and mornings, which is 1,150 days, which is 3 years, 1.5 months. Do you realize what happened here? God, through Daniel, not only did he say 220 years from now, a great persecution is going to break out against the Jews, but it's going to last for 3 years, 1.5 months. And then God will judge Antiochus Epiphanes, and the kingdom will be reestablished in Israel. And that's exactly what happened. You see the interpretation later down in the chapter. I'll finish out here. The vision of the evenings and mornings that has been given to you is true. But seal up the vision is for it concerns the distant future. Daniel was worn out. God rules the nations. God rules the nations whether things are going great or things are going terrible. God will judge his kingdom. God rules the nations. Do not fear. Therefore, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, we too can remain righteous despite any pressure from the world. I will have our last session next. Okay.